Landmarks Commission. Calling to order Historic Landmarks Commission, July 6, 2022. All right, so first, roll call.
Yes, thank you. So I'll go ahead and take roll call. We have Chair Grumbine.
Present?
Vice Chair House is
I'm here.
here.
In transit.
All right, Commissioner Butler. Commissioner Dorden.
Here.
Commissioner Drury is absent. Commissioner Lundvik.
Present.
Commissioner Manuel.
Here.
And Commissioner Uli.
Present.
All right, we have a quorum. Thank you.
All right. So let's go to item A, public comment. Any member of the public may address the commission for up to 2 minutes on any subject within our jurisdiction that is not scheduled on this agenda for a public discussion. And we'll have both online and in real person. So anyone in the audience here who wants to give public comment on something not on the agenda? Going once, twice? All right, should we go to?
Yes, thank you, Chair Grumbine. I'll move to virtual public comment. So I don't see any members of the public joining by Zoom, but we did receive written correspondence from Scott Wentz on behalf of Cars Are Basic. So with that, I'll turn it over back to you, Chair Grumbine.
All right, thank you. All right, so let's go on to item B, approval of the minutes of the Historic Landmarks Commission, June 22nd, 2022.
Motion to approve.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Uli. Second by Vice Chair House. Under discussion, any edits?
Apparently they were perfect as
Yeah.
transcribed.
Yeah, perfect. All I have to be is not here in the minutes.
Yeah.
All right. All right, so in that case, let's have a roll call vote for approval of minutes.
All right, thank you. I'll start with Commissioner Dorden,
Yes.
Commissioner Butler,
Yes.
Commissioner Lundvik,
Yes.
Commissioner Uli,
Yes.
Commissioner Manuel,
Yes.
Vice Chair House,
Yes.
and Chair Grumbine.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes.
All right, thank you. All right, and I did watch the meeting for the record. Item C now, approval of the consent calendar, July 6, 2022.
Motion to approve.
All right, motion by Commissioner Uli,
Second.
second by Vice Chair House. All right, and under summary and,
Yeah, thank you. Item A was for 1723 Santa Barbara Street. The decision was for project design approval and final approval. Item B was for 132 East De La Guerra Street. The item was continued to a date certain of July 20th, 2022. Item C was for 1836 State Street. The decision was for project design approval and final approval with comments. And item D was for 418 State Street. The decision was for project design approval and final approval with comments. The reviewer for item A was Vice Chair House, and the reviewers for items B, C, and D were Vice Chair House and Commissioner Manuel.
all right, thank you. Any other discussion or questions? All right, we have a roll call vote, please.
All right, thank you. I'll start with Commissioner Butler,
Yes.
Commissioner Lundvik,
Yes.
Commissioner Uli,
Yes.
Commissioner Manuel.
Yes for B, C, D, abstain for A.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Dorden,
Yes.
Vice Chair House,
Yes.
and Chair Grumbine.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes.
All right. Great. On to item D, announcements, requests by applicants for continuances and withdrawals, future agenda items, and appeals. We have anything?
Yes, thank you, Chair Grumbine. I have a couple announcements. My first announcement is just to let you know that Commissioner Drury will be absent today. And secondly, I wanted to let you know that Cass Ensberg has been appointed to the commission by City Council and will begin serving just as soon as we get her sworn in, so hopefully within the next meeting or two. And that's it from me. Thank you.
All right, great. Any other?
I have a question of staff.
Yes, Commissioner Lundvik.
Some time ago, we saw an application, I believe it was by Public Works, for an enclosure for the transformer at the end of Library Avenue. And we have not seen that come back. And I hope it just doesn't get lost.
Coincidentally, they have resubmitted quite recently, so we'll be bringing it back to you
Thank you.
before too long. Sure.
They knew that question was coming.
Yeah.
It's not half as bad as the one regarding the Paseo at
Yeah.
parking lot 6 on West.
Did you want to ask about that one too?
No,
Figueroa.
Mr. Houses take care of that.
Okay. All right.
Chair Grumbine, pardon my interruption, sorry, don't have a seat at the table. I wanted to add one other announcement that the city just launched a new website last week, so you may notice some changes to the different, to the HLC and how to find the documents and different things. So if anybody has any trouble finding things or accessing, please let us know and we'll be able to do that. Or if you see any bugs, let us know as well, and we'll get that taken care of. But hopefully, this will be so much easier to not only showcase the work of historic preservation, but then also the work of this commission and the applicants who come here. So just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Other announcements, et cetera? Anything else? All right. Then on to item E, subcommittee reports. So any subcommittee meetings or reports or
Nothing to report.
nothing to report back? All right. Easy. All right. Then we're on to item 1, our discussion item. We're a little early, but do we have, all right, applicant ready. All right, so this is item 1, discussion item. This is a draft African American and Black Historic Context Statement. It's by Paige and Turnbull, Project Manager and Senior Cultural Resources Planner, Flora, I'm going to mangle it, Chu. All right. Well, we'll present the draft African American and Black Historic Context Statement for feedback from the Commission. And so welcome, come on up.
Good
All right.
afternoon.
Yeah, if you could state your name for the record. Oh, yeah.
Oh, perfect, thank
You
you.
gotta
Make sure
talk
that's
right
on.
into the microphone because it doesn't pick you up otherwise. So thank you very much for your report. If you, and I don't know if Ms. Hernandez wanted to say anything as well, but, or any, as an intro, but,
Yeah, I can do a very short intro because
Yeah.
I know Ms. Chu has a lot of information for you. We, as you know, we applied for a grant for this project last summer and received it last fall, and we had an advisory committee that was represented by the commission with Commissioner Uli that did interviews for the consulting team, and we chose Paige and Turnbull in partnership with Healing Justice, and we've been working like crazy because we only have a year to finish it. We have to be done by September. So we've been really in the deep research phase, and now we're ready to present the draft. We will take all your comments as well as public comments that we get and bring you the final draft, hopefully the very end of August. So this would be great to really give us everything you want to see now because of the short timeline to finish it up. And I think that concludes my but welcome. It's been a great.
Thank you. Thanks, Nicole, and good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Flora Chu. I am an Associate Principal and Cultural Resource Planner with Paige and Turnbull, and really honored to be here to present the Santa Barbara African American and Black Historic Context Statement to you. We've really enjoyed working on this project with Healing Justice Santa Barbara, with Nicole, and with the staff here in Santa Barbara, so we're excited to bring this forward to you. Just to give you a quick overview of what the presentation will include, we'll do some introduction, talk a little bit about what Nicole just said, and give an overview of the project. We did have a short timeline to get this done within the grant requirements. And we'll go over the historic context statement a bit. I understand you've gotten at least the digital copy and a draft to review. So we'll talk a little bit about the historical overview and the themes, just sort of two big parts of the context statement. And then a bit about where we are in the process and next steps, and then answer any questions that you may have. As Nicole was talking about, I think our understanding is in about 2020, community members really organized and advocated for the designation of sites that are important to Santa Barbara's African American and Black community. And as part of that, in trying to understand which sites are really significant and worthy of designation, Santa Barbara, the city went and applied for this certified local government grant from the California Office of Historic Preservation and was able to get the grant to work on this historic context statement. And in late 2021, Page and Turnbull was engaged along with our partners, Healing Justice Santa Barbara, to work on the context statement. Just to give you a little bit about our team, so Page and Turnbull, we're an architecture and planning firm focused primarily on historic resources and buildings in historic settings. We have architects, architectural historians, planners on our staff, and with offices in San Francisco, our headquarters, as well as Los Angeles, Sacramento, and just a newly opened office in San Jose. And for this project, actually 3 of our offices were represented. I'm primarily based in the Los Angeles office. And our principal, Ruth Todd, is in San Francisco, and Claire Flynn, who worked on this as one of the architectural historians, she's in Sacramento. And we, as a firm, we've been doing historic context statements and preservation planning documents for a very long time. We're coming up on our 50th anniversary next year, which is exciting for all of us. We're one of the oldest firms in California that focuses on historic buildings and historic architecture in this way. So we're have a good amount of the preservation expertise that we can bring to the table. And partnering with Healing Justice Santa Barbara, really, they brought the local expertise and understanding of Santa Barbara and its African American and Black community. Their organization that was founded around 2000, and it works on advocating for and uplifting the Santa Barbara's African American and Black community, and not just for the city, but just generally for the region. And they, among their members are people who are local historians who've been gathering a lot of this information over the years, and they have a lot of contacts with long-term families and residents, and a couple of the members can trace back their family legacies to Santa Barbara several generations. So they have a lot of the expertise and knowledge that we can build on. And then working with the city, with Nicole and her expertise about Santa Barbara in general and your historic preservation program was very helpful. We had bi-weekly meetings, which was nice for us to talk about the project and sort of work through a lot of the questions and issues that they were coming up. And the advisory committee was also very helpful with Commissioner Woolley representing this commission on there, along with Connie Alexander and Audrey Gamble. They provided some of the initial background when we first met at the beginning of the project, as well as then provide feedback for the administrative draft before this public draft went out to everyone. I did want to talk a little bit about some of the terms that we were using, and this was something that we had a lot of discussions about as part of our project team. We were using the term African American to mean people born or raised in the United States who have African ancestry, and the term Black as a more general term for people of African descent, no matter their nationality or place of birth. And part of that is the time period we're looking at included the Spanish and Mexican era, before the Santa Barbara was part of the United States, and we wanted to use sort of a broader term. So one of the things that came up in our research was the term for, was the Afro-Latino term for people of African backgrounds during, that were here during the Spanish colonial period. But we're also careful to not use the term African American and Black interchangeably, so you'll hear the term African American and Black community throughout, just because for the most part we try to use the terms that people self-identify with, themselves with, and sometimes that was clear and sometimes it wasn't. And at times some of the terms that were used in the past are outdated and ones that we don't use anymore. So we use Black or African American where it's seen fit. Okay, so I'll give you some overview of the project itself. And starting with what is a historic context statement. It is a technical preservation document, and the definition here from the National Park Service, which oversees a lot of the historic preservation activities. I'll just go ahead and read that. It's an organizational structure for interpreting history that groups information about historic properties, that share a common theme, a common geographic area, and a common time period. It really is a history about the physical development of a place. So we're looking at buildings, sites, tangible elements of a geographic area, and often that can be a city. It could be a specific area of a city, as well as a common time period. So it's really, there's usually a beginning date and an end date that we would be looking at. And the themes and patterns that can be a wide range of things. It can be anything from like an architectural movement to something as broad as the physical development of a city over time. So for this, in this case, we were looking at Santa Barbara as our place, a time frame that it took us a little while to identify and define, but it's primarily from the Spanish and Mexican era all the way through 1980. And the theme was the African American and Black community. Next. And just to place the historic context in its own context and why it's useful, it's one of the three things we think about when we're trying to determine what makes a property historic. As all of you know, not every old building is going to be historic. The historic context gives us that sort of broader historic overview of that time, of that place, and of that theme to help us determine and understand whether a specific property is important or significant within that context. And the significance could be under one of the four typical criteria that you're all familiar with that's often used for the National Register of Historic Places, California Register, as well as for your Santa Barbara local register related to events, persons, design, and architecture or information potential. So property would have to be significant under one of those within the context, and then also have historic integrity. And those are the 7 aspects of integrity. Again, I know all of you are very familiar with using those. That's set by the National Park Service for the National Register. And we'll get into some more of that in terms of how the historic context statement here helps with giving some guidelines for historic significance and integrity. We often talk about why we need a context statement. It really is to better understand your resources so that you can, as properties come to you for designation, you have a better sense of what makes them significant, how to judge them against others, and give you a broader understanding of them beyond just that specific building. It's often also used by cities to support their preservation programs or to set goals for their preservation programs to see if there are other things that they would want to do with their programs, and to help with any sort of future planning decisions and sort of inform your larger process. It's used by decision makers such as yourself really as a way to take that information that you have and use it as a technical document to guide your decision making. And it ties well into the project objectives and really what the community was looking for as a way to help designate sites of importance. So our objective really for this project was to summarize and synthesize the history of Santa Barbara's African American and Black community, specifically related to its physical development. Historic context statements are not a comprehensive history. They're not the one and only history for this community. We really relied on a lot of the work that's already been done to take that information and to look at it in the lens of historic preservation and the lens of the built environment and try to understand those patterns and themes and identify through there what kind of properties that you expect to see that can tell that story in the built environment. And then provide that framework for identification and evaluation and designation ultimately. So very quickly, this is our process. You probably have seen this in other ways. We do start with research and gathering that background information, doing additional research for things that were missing so we can understand what we're looking at. We value the community engagement part of it. It's very helpful to listen and to hear from the community members about Santa Barbara in particular, about the sites that may be important. And that helps us then to go back and do our research and follow up on those things. And it's a back and forth of listening and educating and understanding what we're seeing as we go through the process. And then we take all that and develop the draft that you see before you. For the research phase for this, there were some existing articles that were available to us as a good starting point, and some previous work that had been done. The Santa Barbara County Genealogical Society had, not too long ago, started to pull together some slideshows and some information, actually with some of the similar themes that we were looking at. And we were able to take that as a starting point and try to find the sources and follow up, and get some more research on that. Our partners at Healing Justice Santa Barbara and the advisory committee provided us with a lot of good background as well to give us some of the overview and the history about Santa Barbara and its community that we should know about. And then we did research at some of the local regional and online repositories. Healing Justice Santa Barbara was scanning many of the local history articles and information that's at the UC Santa Barbara, local Black History archives. And the Gledhill archives also had newspaper clippings. One of the things that we came across was that the local Santa Barbara newspapers are not digitized after about the mid-1920s. And so it made it a little bit difficult for us to search some of that information through historic newspapers. We did find the California Eagle newspaper, which was a statewide newspaper that focused on the African American and Black communities around the state. And luckily enough, there was a regular Santa Barbara column that was written by usually someone here in Santa Barbara, reporting on some of the social news and events that were happening. So scanning through those to give us a good sense of what was occurring here in Santa Barbara. I believe that was available from about the 19-teens to about mid-1960s, before the newspaper stopped publishing. And then from all the research and from talking to local community members and the advisory group, we're starting to put together a list of important sites and themes. Healing Justice Santa Barbara started to do that. Some locations that had come up in their research that were particularly important to the African American and Black community. And then we had some great community involvement. We were hoping to have an event back in January that actually did not happen because of rising COVID cases. We felt it was probably prudent not to have an in-person event then. Instead, a virtual panel was convened for February. And there was actually 2 panels as part of this event, one with some longtime Santa Barbara residents talking about their experiences here in Santa Barbara, as well then a panel with members of Healing Justice. And Nicole actually was on the panel talking about the history of the African American and Black community in Santa Barbara and this project in particular. And then there was a short film that was very helpful too that Healing Justice Santa Barbara had put together. And I think that is still up and available through YouTube if anyone's interested. I haven't looked recently, but I know it had several hundred hits, and people have been reviewing that. And then most recently, we were able to have a table at the Juneteenth celebration just a few weeks ago where announcing that the draft document is out and available for public comments. We have postcards and stickers that people were very happy to take, and got some great feedback that people were excited to hear about the project like this. And then our advisory committee, like I mentioned, provides some input on the draft document, and we're here now before you for more public comments. And I think there will be probably another meeting that comes before you as well for this project. And Nicole, if I remember correctly, public comments are open through at least July 15th for written comments. So people have the chance to continue to submit any comments for a little while. So we'll go through the content of the historic context statement, just to give you an overview of what's all in there. This is just the table of contents. The front matter tends to be some of the background information, and today I'll go through the historical overview and associated themes, just in a bit more detail. And the historical overview, so this is the different time frames and periods. So some of the subheadings that we had as we're looking at trying to think about our time frame that we would be addressing in this context statement. we did hear, and there was research available about the people of African descent that were here as part of the Spanish settlements. And so we wanted to capture that is part of the history that occurred. The 1782 date is really sort of the first permanent settlement in Santa Barbara, with the Presidio being founded, even though there was exploration here before that. And then we're really focused primarily more on the early American period, with statehood, after the Mexican-American War, and then statehood up to the early 20th century. And a couple of these other periods that were really defined by some of the themes and patterns that we saw. One of the things that we were able to find was some of the census information that helped us see the patterns of migration and patterns of the African American and Black communities' growth over time. So the graph at the top there, sort of tried to see if we can make that a little bit more graphic at least, shows what we can find in the census data every decade for the Black community at the time, and the numbers of members that were recorded. It was always a fairly small percentage of Santa Barbara's overall population, but you can see that there was some growth, there's continued growth, and some periods where there were big jumps in the population numbers. And some of that was tied to things like the first Great Migration, events that were happening broader and beyond Santa Barbara. That was affected here as well. That first Great Migration from about 1910 to 1940 was a lot of people moving out of the South and going to the Northeast and the West, including California, for additional opportunities, and leaving some of the Jim Crow discriminatory activities in the South. Those also tied in with some of the population growth that was happening in Santa Barbara in that period, in that early 20th century. So as the African American Black population was growing, Santa Barbara was also growing. There was enough of a population here around 1903, so that 1900 date. You can see there were, at that point, only 19 recorded African American and Black residents, but by 1910 there were 77. So there was a good jump in that decade. And enough for there to be a Black church that was established here, the St. Paul's AME Church, established around that time. And you start to see a greater settlement. And the other thing that the census data helped us identify was that up to 1920, the Black population lived throughout Santa Barbara. They lived where the development was occurring, which is pretty much on both sides of State Street. And just a few blocks within that area was considered Santa Barbara, the center of Santa Barbara. But by 1930, in that 1920 decade, we started to see an increased concentration in the east side. There was a growth in population from 186 to 525, so a good jump. But Santa Barbara was growing in that decade as well. And that was telling us that there was a reason that there was this increasing concentration to the east side, likely tied to increasing use of racial covenants, as well as just in terms of the attitude that maybe people had toward who was allowed to live where. But we're starting to see more of an ethnically mixed community in the east side growing in that period. And then in the mid to late 20th century, World War II was sort of another big milestone and for everyone in the country, and this part of the Second Great Migration, where a lot of the opportunities related to World War II was a driver for people moving to different parts of the country, particularly to California, for some of the wartime activities. And that tied in with the African American and Black population as well. I think you can see a pretty good jump from 1940, I think that was the 605, to 1950, almost double in that decade, and continued in those post-war years. And the population at that point, we're seeing they're increasingly professionalized, both the people who are living here already and those who are coming in. One of the leaders of that period is Dr. Horace McMillan, one of the few African-American medical professionals in Santa Barbara, and he He came in the 1950s and established his practice along with several other doctors. It was an interracial practice. I think there was a Japanese-American doctor along with a couple other white doctors who together formed this practice, the Family Medical Center, and built their building that's still standing. Dr. McMillan and others at this point were also very involved in the fight for civil rights that was happening here in Santa Barbara, mirroring what was happening nationwide. The NAACP as an organization became much more active here, the local chapter, and they were conducted some surveys pointing out some of the housing and employment discrimination that was occurring, and really sort of brought that to light. That quick historical overview, there's more information. Hopefully you have a chance to read it. Again, we're just skimming the very top of just providing some of that overview. From that, we were able to identify several themes that really ran through that whole history. And these were not the only themes. They were just the ones that we identified and that sort of came up the most often. I think there are plenty of other themes that could be studied in more depth as we go beyond this, just these. But we wanted to talk about them more. The themes were a way to get into a bit more detail about some of these property types and then tie them back into those eligibility requirements and integrity requirements. So if you'll bear with me, I'll go through each one because I think this is the part that all of you will be using quite a bit as properties come to you. We have religion and spirituality up front because it seemed to be one of the most important aspects for the African American and Black community. The role of religion really seemed to play a strong part in the lives of the community members. They were their social gathering places. A lot of the mutual support came through churches and church membership. Business and financial support and networks came through them. And for the community where they didn't necessarily have the resources to build meeting halls and specific locations for some of the activities, the churches served as those as well. They were meeting places for clubs, they were concert halls, and were in just places for clubs and organizations to meet. Many of the community members and leaders of the churches ended up becoming civic leaders as well. And there were primarily two, what the research was telling us was called the mainstream churches, the St. Paul's AME Church as well as Second Baptist Church. But there was many other smaller congregations that have predominantly African American and Black congregations that maybe were less known but also played a really important role in the lives of their membership. While most of them were Christian churches, likely not all were, and so we want to make sure that we're talking more broadly about religion and spirituality. And we created these, this is sort of a chart to help with some of the eligibility standards, looking at the 4 general criteria, as well as the 5th one for Santa Barbara's local landmark and structure of merit criteria. And so we did they're similar enough that we can address them all together. So the first one is the A, B, C is National Register eligibility. The middle 1, 2, 3 is California Register, and then the last 1, 2, 3 relates to the Santa Barbara's local criteria. And because it was a small community for African American and Black community members in Santa Barbara, we're finding that not necessarily a lot of the resources survived. We wanted to have a much broader definition of what significance was and try to give you the flexibility to see, as properties came to you, understand what would qualify as being significant. So for religion and spirituality, under events, A/1/1, we talked about the association with a predominantly Black congregation as the primary location of worship for a significant period of time. So if a property met those requirements, it could be determined eligible and significant under that criteria. In addition, if a property was associated with a specific event or movement, it could also be, it could also meet this criterion A11. For persons, the association would be with the individual who has made an important contribution. So it has to be determined that that person themselves are important to Santa Barbara or to the African American and Black community or to history in general. And that person is recognized as a significant individual. Oftentimes that would be a pastor or a community, a leader in the church. But some of the religious organizations may also be significant because there's a number of historic personages associated with it, not just one. There may be multiple people. For architecture design, criterion C/3/3 and Santa Barbara criterion 5, for the most part, those would be the same as if you were looking at any property, a religious property that is significant for its architecture or design. It would have to meet your pretty standard criteria for those related to distinctive characteristics, work of a master, possesses high artistic value. So because those are the same, I won't get into too much of the detail for the rest of them. We provide some additional considerations, so again, to help with some of the guidance as to what makes something significant. The reverse side of a long-term location would be if a property only has a short association with a congregation, location of occasional gatherings, or the congregation only has short time in Santa Barbara, that property likely would not meet that criteria, would not be significant enough to meet that criterion A11. Under criterion B, related to persons, it really has to do with the productive life of the person the property does. So it may be a very significant person, but the time that that person is important to history was not directly, if it was not directly related to that property, they may not be significant enough to meet that criteria. And you can take a look at properties and compare the length of time and significance. What we found with a number of the churches is that they may have been in multiple locations over time. And so it's a matter of trying to decide, is one location more significant than the other? Is it based on time frame that they were there? I think we were thinking that ownership was an important milestone. If the property was owned by the African American or Black congregation, if it's constructed or remodeled for them, that would elevate it to be more significant than if it was necessarily a shared space or a place that was leased. It showed a progression of being able to own a property, having those resources, and then being able to control what happens to the property. So those are all things that you can consider as you're looking at properties that come to you and trying to make a decision on how significant they may be. The other couple of things here, just so you're aware, for the National Register, there's a couple of other criterions to consider. For religious properties, there's a criterion consideration A that has to do with that the property, if it's a religious or property, its significance has to be related to its architecture or historic significance, not just that it's a religious property. So that provides some guidance for that. And then criterion consideration G is for the National Register primarily too, that properties that are less than 50 years of age could be eligible for the National Register if they're shown to have exceptional significance. That's something that may come up and will be consistent for all of these themes. And then we get to integrity and some of the things to think about for integrity. For this, the guidance we're giving is that the properties need to at least retain integrity of location, feeling, association, and design for the period of significance. If it is significant for its architecture and its design, it should also, or must also, retain integrity of materials and workmanship. And that's what we often find properties are associated under events or persons. They may have more changes happen to them, but that there's still enough integrity to tie their significance back to or the physical property back to what makes them significant. And that actually, I'm going to jump to the last bullet point, to that question of would somebody from the period of significance recognize the property is often used, just so that recognizing the changes, all properties are going to change over time. But if it's not significance for its architecture, there's some more flexibility on the integrity side. The property should retain most of its character defining feature, doesn't have to retain all of it, but most of them. And then we have this at minimum, the primary building retains overall form, massing, and rhythm window openings. So we find that those changes really make a big difference. If the roof form has changed, if the massing has changed, you really start to not be able to recognize the property. But some changes in windows and openings can happen and you would still recognize it. So there could be some degree of alter or remove materials. We want to give you an example of under religion and spirituality. This is the Bethel Church of God in Christ, just down across the street, I think, that way, that we found. And we found a great photo in the California Eagle that showed some of the deaconess board that was in front of this building. It's the same building with the diamond windows, but the property itself was purchased by the Church of God in Christ, Pastor H.P. Fisher in 1940, and it's been home to different Church of God in Christ denominations since. It seems to be primarily African-American congregations, and they're a Pentecostal denomination. The building is older. It was built in 1920 and had a church prior to the ownership by the Church of God in Christ. And it's had some alterations. There was a permit in 1966 to add stucco to the exterior. So based on what we can tell, at least with the photograph from California Eagle, those diamond windows are still there. Aside from the stucco, it doesn't seem to be that altered. So this probably likely would qualify under criterion A-/1/1 and would have significant integrity. So let's go on to clubs and organizations. This is another one that we found was really important to the community and their social life. Oftentimes, the African-American and Black community may have to establish their own groups because they were not welcome or included in some of the similar groups that were around in Santa Barbara. And the groups were there for socializing as well as mutual support for charitable purposes, for things like scholarships or to support students, as well as for recreation and many other purposes. And they really seem to be one of the main ways that a lot of the community members socialize with each other across their different church organizations, despite that. Though some of these organizations came out of the churches as well, and really helped with their civic engagement. We were able to break down some of the organizations in some subcategories. Fraternal organizations was one that seemed to be fairly important for the time frame that fraternal organizations were important. So the Mason groups and Elks Club, women's clubs and self-improvement educational groups. Some of these came and went, but or some of them were around for quite a bit of time. Some were local chapters of national groups, and others were just sort of local groups that formed. And then I want to point out the Franklin Neighborhood Center and its construction in 1974. It really sort of was one of the first dedicated spaces for community groups in the East Side. Prior to that, we were seeing a lot of these groups were meeting at the churches or meeting in people's homes. They didn't necessarily have the resources to build community centers and meeting halls for themselves. And this was across the East Side, I think, not just for the African American and Black community. So having the Franklin Neighborhood Center being built in 1974, that became a meeting location and a place to support other organizations and groups. So for the eligibility standards here, some of these are very similar to the religion and spirituality category, which is if a property is the primary meeting office location or place of activity for a predominantly Black organization or club or group that's made significant contributions to Santa Barbara. the property could be eligible under criterion A/1/1. Again, if it's associated with a significant event or movement, it would also qualify. Under persons is more if they're a group is associated with a number of historic personages, whether it's the leader of a group over time was always became a leader of the community, or there are several community leaders as part of a group. It could qualify for under that criterion. Same thing with the religion and spirituality. If a property only has a short association or is a location of occasional gatherings, it probably wouldn't qualify. And you can compare the time and significance with the different properties that's associated with these groups. In terms of integrity, a lot of these we've already talked about. I think one of the things to consider, because we're finding homes as well as commercial properties, some businesses as locations associated as groups and organizations as main meeting places, you may see some houses come to you that will qualify under this theme and those criteria, but some of the residential properties or commercial properties may have had some alterations that are fairly typical for homes, especially modest homes. So things like churches enclosed porches or replaced windows that may occur. It would not automatically say that that property has lost integrity. We think that would be fairly common. And going back to that, as long as someone would recognize it from that period. Hopefully the interior spaces where the gatherings occurred still remain. In this example is the F513 Laguna Street. It is a commercial property that is associated with the Black Elks Club, or a Black Elks Club, the Harmony Lodge for number 481. We found references to this lodge going back to 1924. And they met at several locations, it seems like, including at 235 East Coda, across the street from here, for a period of time in the 30s. And they started meeting at this location or this address in the 1950s, but then this specific building that still remains, they seem to have commissioned it and constructed it in 1963, just before the popularity of things like Elks Clubs and fraternal organizations started to wane. So while their association with this property is not that long, it is one that, it's one of the few that we found where they actually owned it and built it. And the property has enough integrity, we feel like, though some of it has changed, some of the stone base has been removed, and some of the windows have changed. For the most part, the building is still readable from what we can see of the plans. And then I'll quickly go through the other two. Some of it you've already heard before. For residential and housing patterns, we were starting to look at where people lived and why they lived in the areas that they lived in. And this, we were looking back as far as the Spanish and Mexican eras, just because there potentially are some of the adobes that remain, maybe associated with Afro-Latino residents during some period of time. Again, we started to see this pattern of concentration from 1900, 1910. You can see some of the graphics from the census information. Black residents were in the developed part of Santa Barbara, and then increasingly in the east side. Actually, let me go back and quickly talk about some of the housing discrimination that occurred and likely why they were pushed to the east side. There's discussion. We found both homes that were rented and owned throughout the periods, and again, places where people socialized. The homeownership really was a point of pride. But we had an end period for this theme around 1970, because in 1968 there was the Fair Housing Act at the federal level that finally prohibited a lot of the housing discrimination based on race. And that was both for things that governments could do. So racial covenants were found to not be enforceable in 1948, but that still meant that realtors were steering people to certain neighborhoods or apartment owners can decide that they would say that they wouldn't rent to certain people, and all that became illegal with the 1968 Fair Housing Act. So recognizing it took a few years for that to get established, the 1970 date helps us with that, with understanding that historic context. Again, I don't think there's too much here that's different than what we've talked about before. A property for residential settlement could be significant as if it was associated with an active challenge to discriminatory housing practices. This is also a place where if there are significant individuals in the African American and Black community and their home still remains, it could be found eligible under this criteria. I think we've talked about most of these already. Again, that sense of a property having that longer-term association rather than a short association. If you're a significant individual and they lived in 3 or 4 different houses, you'll have a chance to decide which one or more may be significant based on, again, their length of time, what they did during that time that they're associated with the property. And we were finding that there may be some properties from the Spanish and Mexican era that still remains, that research may uncover that there is a link to Afro-Latino residents, and that may be something that could amend those nominations. Let's see. And same with integrity, we've already talked about this in terms of some things like windows and porches may change, but could still be considered eligible and have enough integrity. This was the home, this property at 721 Spring Street was one of the homes of Dr. Frances Ford. She was a Black woman, a practicing podiatrist, or this word I haven't figured out how to pronounce at the time, chiropractic, so something like a podiatrist. And received her medical license in the early 1920s. She moved to Santa Barbara in 1921 and lived here until she passed in 1959. We found that she had offices in several locations, including a couple on State Street at different periods of her career. Her longtime home and office, unfortunately, has been demolished. So this is one of the few residences that we found that's still associated with her, that still has enough integrity, even though the windows, as you can see, likely have been replaced. The rest of the building still reads as it likely did when she owned it in the 1950s. So this would qualify and have enough integrity. And then finally, business and commercial development, another important theme. Businesses were gathering places as well for the community members and provided the businesses and services that maybe were not available to this community in other parts of Santa Barbara. Being able to own a business and open a business was not an easy feat, especially if they also own the property. So we want to recognize that those were important milestones, important aspects for the African American and Black community. I think we've talked about many of these already. Properties that were Black owned or operated and contributed to the commercial growth and development of Santa Barbara would qualify. Some of these properties we saw that had more than one Black owned or operated business, and whether that is because the owner was Black themselves or for whatever reason that building in particular had multiple businesses. I think those are important enough to recognize that there's a pattern there to be considered eligible under that criteria. And here, probably the biggest thing, we've talked about these additional considerations as well. I think the biggest thing for integrity with the commercial buildings that we've seen certainly would be storefront replacements, which are pretty common, and that would not automatically exclude a property from being eligible or having enough integrity. We did see a few properties where they were so altered that we couldn't tell if they were new buildings or alterations of existing buildings. And that told us that somebody from that period would not recognize the building, so that would not have enough integrity to still qualify. So this is an example for one of the properties on Haley Street, which really was the commercial heart of the east side, and for the Black and African American community. This property was the home of the Goldenberg Cafe and the Golden Success Barber, starting in 1967. You can see from the drawing that it looks pretty similar to what it was proposed as when it was built. And there's just some minor replacements. So for the most part, it would still have integrity in association with these businesses. So just to wrap up, I think that's my time, is to say that we have some recommendations for next steps on this project, for what you can do with the historic context statement. It's really, now that we've identified some properties with each of the themes for further research, those would be good ones to think about conducting some more additional research, looking at their integrity, confirming their association with each of these themes, and thinking about designating them for local landmarks and structure of merits. There's discussion, too, of potentially doing a national register, multiple property submission. I think you have the basis of that here with some more properties. You can think about doing that as a next activity. We also, again, we're finding the contribution of the African American and Black community for some of the sites that are already designated, like the Santa Barbara High School, and the San Marcos building and the Balboa building, where Dr. Francis had her office. Since these are already designated, if the opportunity comes up to amend their nominations to reflect the African American and Black community, that's always helpful. That sort of reflects the broader story of the properties and their associations with Santa Barbara. And then to continue and think about updating the historic context statement. These documents tend to be living documents. They can't be updated and should be updated over time. That 1980 date right now is about 40 years from where we are now. But in 10 years, it'll be only 30 years. And it may be time to look at that next period of history and to think about what properties or what themes may be important. And just to continue to document and recognize the contribution of African American and Black members of Santa Barbara's community. There's a lot more that can be done that's outside the historic context statement and outside just designating sites. We hope that more oral histories are done. We hope that there is more research that will be uncovered. The county is doing some work about removing some of the restrictive covenant language. So I think from that, you may be able to find more information about why certain neighborhoods did or did not have African American and Black residents. So we're hoping that information comes out soon. And just to wrap up where we are now in Bull here in July, we started in November with the project and did most of our research and writing in the first half of this year. Comments are available, written comments are being taken through July 15th for the draft. And then we'll take those comments and comments that you may have here and incorporate them into a final draft that will come back to you, I believe, at the end of August or beginning of September at one of your meetings then for a final review. The grant deadline is the project has to be completed by the end of September, so it all needs to sort of wrap up and be sent to the state by then. And we think that hopefully will be enough time for all of you to take a look and provide some comments. And then if you have any questions or if people have comments, they can send it to Nicole at her email address or reach out to her for more information. And we'll see if any of you have any questions or comments.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that presentation and for all the work on the report. And so right now I think we'll go to public comment on this item. So any member of the public here that wants to comment on it in the room right now, please step over to the podium. And if you haven't already filled out a speaker slip, do so afterwards. And you'll have 2 minutes to comment. So.
Hello, HLC. My name is Crystal Farmer Seagar. I'm one of the founders of Healing Justice. We were sub-consultants on this project, along with Paige and Turnbull and the city at SB. Nicole, I just want to say it was such a joy working with you. It has been, as we've told you many times, you've been a delight. We understand the city's processes, and it's not always easy to work with, but you have been just such a joy and a delight to work with, and we hope to continue to work with you. This is, it's really bittersweet. I'm a longtime descendant. My family's been here since 1906. Some of my family members are actually in some of those. My grandmother, Cora Griffin, got here in 1906, and she was in the George Washington Carver Club. So a lot of this is near and dear to our hearts. Letitia Forney, who's also in Healing Justice, is actually a descendant of Jerry Forney, which was the first Black registered person in Santa Barbara. So again, this work is near and dear to our hearts, but I say it's bittersweet because it also just shows the long-time erasure, anti-Black racism, and just colonization, right, of what Black folks have been through for centuries in this nation, and how as we were going through and learning and surveying, this history, it was really sad to know I've been here, all my life. My grandmother's been here all her life, and a lot of this stuff we just didn't even know about, right? And so we're hoping to turn this into ongoing projects. We, after doing this historic context statement and meeting with different community members, I'm sorry, it's so hard to look at the time and keep talking. Meeting with
Don't worry,
different.
you were part of the, I didn't realize
Okay.
that you were part of the.
Oh, okay, sorry. I'm like, I gotta get out this and this and this and this.
No.
But it was so exciting doing this work because we got to create more from it, And so, again, I do want to name that this work has been being done in this community for a long time, and Black folks in this community were archiving this stuff in their house. I mean, we took some stuff out of my grandmother's house, right, to put in the historic context statement, and then to house in. We had a melanin gallery on State Street, and from what we were learning in the historic context statement, and what Nicole was bringing us, and Paige and Turnbull, and what community members, longtime Black community members, were bringing us, Healing Justice, which was really Letitia. I'll give it credit to her. We wanted to make a mobile museum and put this on display, and we did that. 3 Black women. We did that. We went to UCSB Special Collections. Shout out to Dr. Cedric Robinson, who was a professor in Black Studies and actually got his graduate students years ago to go out and start interviewing, right, Black folks in this community and getting a lot of that oral history, because a lot of things we say in the Black community is the way we pass down history is through storytelling, right? It's ancestral because at one time it was illegal for us to read and write, right? And so storytelling was a big part of our community. So he went out and took grad students and got all this oral history and documented and scanned newspapers. And so me and Letitia and some interns we got from UCSB were in special collections just documenting stuff, reading and crying. And as we were reading, me and Letitia realized our grandmothers might have been friends. They were in pictures together in the George Washington Carver Club. And here we were just meeting each other in 2020 and lived down the street from each other in Goleta. And I say that to say, this is how important this work is, right? It's about building communities. It's about a sustaining community. And it's about telling the generations to come that we do belong here. For a long time, I felt like I didn't. I was always the only Black child in my class, right? Sometimes me and my siblings were the only Black kids at the school, right? And so growing up and just having to always come with that reality and always feeling displaced. I mean, a lot of that has to do with generational trauma, right, from slavery, and knowing how we were brought here. It's hard to remember that you belong, right, in history and a connection to land. And the indigenous community talks about this a lot, right, connection to land, preserving landmarks, monuments. It is meaningful in a way that it ascends beyond, right, our being as humans. And so this project, it was beautiful. It brought together a community. it, in a sense, in a way, too, it became like the basis of the Juneteenth block party that we had, was, right, retelling history, rewriting history, reminding people that Black people have been here, because it was on historic Gray Ave, which we learned the Funk Zone was historically Black. And then I learned, as we were putting together the Juneteenth, that my grandmother lived on Gray Ave, which is now businesses, which is also really sad. But history is so important. I never realized it for a long time, but actually one of my top 5 strengths is context. And I believe I was born and meant to do this work alongside Simone and Letitia. And it has just been the most beautiful experience I think I've ever gone to, and it has made me want to stay in this community and live here and raise my Black children here, by being reminded that I did belong, and learning about the contributions my family made to this community, and the longtime organizers and activists that were just the amazing Black women that were in my family. But I really hope the HLC will be partners with us in preserving some of these landmarks. We even started a historical trolley tour where we did it for the first time. We took some UCSB, there's a department called the Afro-Latina Dads, and they partnered with us because they had some HBC students come out because they want to introduce them to possibly going to grad school at UCSB, and they reached out to us because they had seen the timeline we put together, and we were like, hey, we've been trying to develop this historical trolley tour. This is the perfect time. And for the first time, we took them around Santa Barbara, and we showed them a lot of what you'll read about and see in the historic context statement, and took them to a lot of these monuments. And these students were so ecstatic and excited and thrilled, and you could feel they felt a sense of the Black community here. And so we're working on a lot because of this. We're excited. It's going to be an ongoing project. Like Flora said, we now have new stuff to add because we've created history a lot now in this community. And I hope one day we'll be added onto the historic context statement. But we've been able to start a documentary based off of this work that we want to do an ongoing project. You can see it on our YouTube at Healing Justice. And we started a timeline, which I just want to note before I sit down that when we talk about erasure of the Black community, as you'll see in a lot of these buildings that, need to be structures of merit and designated as historic landmarks, a lot of it, when you look back in history, was taken away from the Black community, right? And that's a part of erasing our history. And one thing that was really sad for us is we created this timeline, and then we had to put it away in storage. So it's sitting in storage now, right? A beautiful display of taking you all the way, dating back to the 1600s, and taking you back to how long in the Black people have been here and the contributions they made to this community. And I say this to say that this aids to erasure, right? And for the public that's watching it, and for folks on HLC, and for folks that have connections, it's important that we continue to display history and we continue to tell this history. And it is really a disservice to this community that something so beautiful like that was created in partnership with the city of SB and Page and Turnbull is in storage. So again, thank you, Nicole. Again, such a joy, such a joy. Can't tell you enough. Page and Turnbull, it's been amazing working with you. HLC, I look forward to continues to partner with you and build a relationship between the HLC and Healing Justice, continue to do this work. And thank you for letting me speak over the 2-minute time.
Thank you. And sorry, can I get your name again?
Yeah, it's Crystal.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Crystal. All right. Great. Thanks. All right. Does anyone want to try to follow that with public comment? Any other member of the public in this room that would like to speak? Otherwise, we'll go to virtual public comment.
Yes, thank you, Commissioners. So I can go ahead and go over virtual public comment now. So I can see a few members of the public joining by Zoom. If you'd like to speak on this item, please raise your hand to indicate that you would like to speak, and I will call on you. So I can see one hand raised from Simon A. Simon A., I'm going to go ahead and send you an unmute request, and you will have 2 minutes to speak.
Okay, hi everyone. This is Simone. Actually, not Simon. I was actually a part of the team as well. I'm one of the co-founders of Healing Justice Santa Barbara with Crystal. And so I just kind of wanted to add and affirm so much of what she said. I can't see the time while I'm speaking, but hopefully that's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. You can go over too.
Okay, thank you so much. So you all, of course, as a landmark committee, know when we brought this project at the very beginning, having worked through the process of trying to protect two different religious sites. And it just took like a long amount of time, but also we were in discussion with you all about the amount of barriers too, because something that Crystal has made a point of mentioning, and I just want to repeat here, was when we were initially pushing to make sure that the AME church was protected, we learned that that particular parish had tried to go through the process in the 90s and was held up. We were told by something like paperwork, but again, if we think about how systems work and how sometimes that can aid the displacement of Black people and the erasure of Black histories, that is certainly an example, because especially a site like that should not have taken so long to have been protected. And so I just want to name as well that we're really grateful to Sojourner, who suggested that we then partner with Nicole, who I agree with Crystal has been a joy, such a joy to work with, really encouraging and supportive, helpful in all of our outreach, innovative ideas, and excited, just as excited as we are, even though we don't have the same research knowledge about different buildings and collecting pictures. But really, Sojourner and Nicole brought this as a way to be able to affirm and uplift more than one site at a time, because we do not have the luxury of time when thinking of protecting these sites of Black history. And so I'm so pleased with the draft that is out now with multiple sites, but also that it's partnered with history. I do know that there will be some questions for us to consider, like what do we do about sites where buildings have been demolished? How do we still appreciate and name them, like Lincoln School and other sites? But I'm hoping that you all as a commission can think creatively with us around that, because that is a reality of so many of some of the addresses that we were interested in and wanted to preserve and at least wanted to mark in some way. I do want to mention the joy it was to lead some of the outreach that we've done. So we were required by the contract to do 3 different ones, and hopefully people were able to join and see those. The elder panel that we did with Miss Yonja Brown, Miss Akiva, is still up on our YouTube. It's on the city's website now, which we're grateful for, and that has been viewed over 350 times. The Juneteenth festival that we put on, which we're in the 5th year of doing, but this year was especially important because of this historic work, was visited by thousands of people, and we're so grateful that Flora was able to come and be there in person. And I really hope this marks a turn towards this Black history becoming public history. I think something that Crystal alluded to, right, was that so much of this information was held at UCSB special collections. And so some of these pictures and interviews, which were beautiful, were only seeing the light of day like 2 times or so a year, which really isn't honoring the history with which Black people shared and uplifted them, right? So I'm really grateful that there hopefully will be a shift to more public history and a public engaging with what Black people have done in this community. I will say I'm hopeful as well that we can also address some of the things that are in the context statement but didn't get uplifted. Like I wanted to make sure that we name the presence of the KKK and how that coincided with the changing demographics of Santa Barbara. We also found newspaper articles talking about how, in particular, Black Muslims were discriminated against, and the Milpitas Association evicted them without just cause, which was really based on religious and race-based discrimination. So in the process of uncovering these stories, I guess it's just been a reminder that we need to be much more truthful about the history of Santa Barbara and think much more creatively about how we will preserve these truths for other people to engage with. The last thing I just want to say is gratitude to Flora and her team with their help of pulling through census documents and partnered with Nicole's help with partnering with different like museums. We were able to get, records from the Mission to document some of these early Black residents as well. It's really uncovered and also affirmed the legacy of Black resistance and family making locally. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity, which, and I have to name this, has only been possible because of organizing. Because also, if we're honest, the city of Santa Barbara was not embarking on like a Black history statement or talking about how long Black people have been in Santa Barbara prior to what Healing Justice has. So honestly, right now we're doing catch up, but it has been a joy to be able to do this, especially in partnership with Flora, who has made so much of architecture accessible to us as folks who have different backgrounds and histories, and Nicole as well, because she's really helped in demystifying some of these processes to make sure that we can be equitable in the ways that we use city programs and services. And so I look forward to seeing the feedback that we get, because I know that people can still send in written feedback until mid-month. So I look forward to seeing what feedback, but already, just in response to some of the outreach that we've been doing, we've heard really positive things from Black folks, but just non-Black community members as well. So I'm excited for what this means for our community.
All right, thank you. All right, do we have anyone else for public comment?
All right, thank you, commissioners. So I don't see any more hands raised for this item. So I'll move to written correspondence. We have not received any written correspondence. So with that, I'll turn it over back to you, Chair Grumbine.
All right, thank you. Okay, so let's go to the commission for any questions, and then we'll go into, this was a huge report, and I know that a lot of if there's smaller stuff that we can be kind of sent, we can do that, as well as cover some of any key things that anyone has for questions or comments. We can kind of go through and make it a little more fluid in terms of not just going questions and then going comments. So we can kind of have a little bit of a dialogue. So,
Okay.
Commissioner
Chair,
Gordon?
I have a couple of questions, or a question. It's about the funding for the study. And I understand the grant came from the state, but it was federal dollars originally that went to the state first. What's the sequence?
Yes. Actually, it's part of the Federal Preservation Act. Sets aside money through the Secretary of Interior's office to filter to local preservation communities through the state preservation offices. So it comes through the federal, comes through the states, and they can distribute it through certified local governments.
So where is the September deadline coming from?
They give you apply for a grant, and they give you 1 year to. You have 1 year to spend it and close it out. And that's just I think because they get each annually. It's an annual.
Okay.
So everybody, and I think Paige and Turnbull has done quite a few of these. So a lot of the consultants are used to working on that 1 year track. And that's really why their expertise is so great, because they know how to get research done really fast and put it into. When the reporter, I told her, she's like, "How long have you been working on this?" I was like, "Since November 1st." And that's a lot of work for that short of amount of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to jump into a little comment there, seeing the sort of the behind the scenes, Ms. Hernandez was from the beginning of this discussion has been really a fantastic, identifying a great way of actually getting a historic context statement in a way that we have never had before in the city, period, for anything. So identifying both an ability to actually get a grant to develop something that really helps out in this way. So thanks for all of your background work. Other questions, comments? We'll kind of do a free for all if you want. Wanda.
Mr. Chair, since Nicole's boss is in the room, you should put in for a raise.
Now's the time.
No, but seriously, it is an excellent draft. It's quite illuminating and educational for us to read. I just have a couple of comments, and I think I sent these in. One is to include a mechanism for a multiple properties document. As you know, they're a little complicated to get done. I'm doing one on veterans buildings in California currently. And this statement should have a listing of the various resources. I think there are a few listed under the themes, but there should be an appendix that lists them all so that we know what they are.
Thank you, Commissioner Uli. Other
Mr. Chairman?
questions? Yes.
So I took the time to read it twice
Wow.
because I really, I'm a graduate student of UCSB in political science, et cetera, so I had a great personal interest. Secondly, are there plans or was there anything in the budget to actually move this to a digital platform?
We do have plans to keep it up on the city's website for sure, if that's what you mean.
So I can see, because this is what I do, there'd be a lot of other ways to make this more available on a much broader basis digitally. A wiki, for example. That would allow use of multimedia, search engine response, contributors as you do find and update your materials and your information, you can update in real time, for example. And it would give, I love the phrase that the caller said, Black history becomes public history. And this, I would encourage you to move this to a digital platform. And by that I mean a website or a wiki or something like that. And you mentioned also, I think it was Crystal who said, well, this is up to 1980. All right, well, there's no need to go, okay, in 5 years or 10 years we do another whole blast. You can do it incrementally as you go and as you find new materials. You can source, you can link. I'll stop there, but the intent would be to give you a much broader footprint and the ability to real-time update and add and have people searching wherever they are and find that material.
That's a great idea. Hopefully there would be the resources to do that and think about moving it online and making it broader. And I think as Crystal and Simone was talking about, Healing Justice Santa Barbara has a timeline that's a display. And I think some of that has been or can be online as well. So I think.
We have a 3D tour of it on our website, so if you happen to miss it, you can go. It's under programming historical archive work, and there's a 3D tour you can take of the timeline.
Those would be great next steps for this project, and I think for the history of African Americans and the Black community in general.
Commissioner Byrd?
I have a couple of comments, and I've already submitted an editorial comment to Nicole after reading it. But I have a comment about demographics in the report. I have a suggestion, actually more than a comment, regarding the presentation of demographic information. This draft includes information about the relative size of the Black and African American community at different points in time. The information spread out through the report. There's like 3 different tables. And I would like to see it collected in one place and presented visually as a chart or a graph that charted the growth of the community again, along with the growth of Santa Barbara as a whole. So there'd be 2 lines on that chart. And I think the information's already there in the report. I would just like to see it collected and vividly presented in a single chart. The other comment deals with the question of physical integrity and the challenge of erased or missing history physically. Right? Central to the designation process that this commission deals with is the determination that a building retains enough of its physical integrity, its appearance, material, and overall character to warrant or qualify for designation. Because of major changes in the urban fabric of this town, I'm thinking here, for example, of Building 101, this may be a high bar or a difficult bar to reach for some aspects. And also, in the case of organizations like the NAACP, it may be difficult to identify specific buildings associated long enough with the organization. Yet the history of this community and its place within the overall history of Santa Barbara needs to be recognized so that all Santa Barbarans can have a full, complex, and honest understanding of its history and of this place. So I suggest one part of a larger strategy to record and honor that story of the Black and African American community could be to look at something like the Blue Plaque program in London, England. Blue plaques are permanent signs installed in public places to commemorate a link between that location and a famous person, event, or former building. They are not the same as historic designation of a building, which is what this commission does. But they do testify to the history of a site when the historic fabric, the very physical integrity of that site, does not survive. They complement and amplify efforts to connect the present to the past. And I would encourage people to think about a program like that.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Jordan. You can say anything you want to that, but.
No, I think that's a great point, and that is something that we found that a number of sites that may have been significant are no longer existing.
Erasure and disappearance. And
Exactly.
there has to be some way to deal with that.
Yeah, so there's, and I think that's one of the recommendations to think about the city if there's some sort of program for that. At the same time, it also makes the properties that do remain more significant because there's a rarity to them, and providing some of that flexibility and recognizing that while in historic preservation worlds, we're looking for some level of integrity, that's still important, that there's still some physical connection that's not too altered. But there's flexibility for that some of these properties may have some changes that we may not accept if they were properties that were designated for their architecture. But for the stories that they tell, they should and still be recognized.
Sort of as a slight tie into that, can you, so you, in your presentation, you talked about, mentioned briefly interiors and having the interiors, and that's kind of one of the things that it's a little bit funny because we don't actually have control over designating anything on the interior, but it's the Secretary of the Interior Standards. But using that as a potential link that is, sort of how you can maybe talk a little bit about how the interiors of buildings that may have things that still exist, how they can help be part of that designation or not.
Yeah, I would think for most part, especially private residences, the interiors or would be things that you would not designate or have the oversight for. Potentially some of the public buildings, there may be some sense of some of those openings. And I think if you're talking particularly about something like the National Register or some of your Mills Act programs, I'm not sure if some of that can extend to the interior. That's probably more of a guideline. It's not a requirement to look at some of the aspects of the interior, particularly ones that were meeting spaces. I think it would be a case-by-case basis, but that's the idea of some integrity. So depending on the meeting space, if it was intended to be a meeting space, but it's so altered that you can't get that sense anymore, that may be something to consider in your deliberations.
Great, thanks. One point of clarification, so that in general, this is dealing with the Santa Barbara region, would you say, as opposed to just the city of Santa Barbara, even though obviously this is a city of Santa Barbara effort, but.
For the most part, we were looking at the city of Santa Barbara. So the historical overview was a little bit broader. It wasn't just limited to the city of Santa Barbara, but when we're looking at properties that would be eligible or properties to research further, those were just within the city borders, given that this is the city of Santa Barbara project. That's where the funding is. And this is where you have jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, thanks for that. Other Commissioner?
I have a question.
Commissioner Lundbeck.
On page 72, under that table, where you talk about
Would you be
eligible.
able to, hold on one second, would you be able to, on the computer, go to that? Oh, I see, it's on a presentation.
Yeah, under B, persons, under the first bullet, the last sentence reads, that is, the person is recognized as a significant individual in history. I assume the implication is, of course, it's the history of Santa Barbara. Yeah, even though you haven't stated it.
It could be in Santa Barbara, it could be to California, it could be
Okay.
a national level, it could be within
Okay.
the African American and Black community of Santa Barbara.
So a significant person in the state of California, Sacramento or whatever, who had some contact with Santa Barbara, that would enhance its eligibility.
Yes, if you can tie that person, what made them significant to this property that's in Santa Barbara.
Thank you.
All right. I had one more question about, you talked about criteria A11, and about how for a short period, and actually in a lot of them you talk about a short period. What is a short period in your guesstimate for an organization or for a person to be associated? What general, can you give sort of general feeling of what a short period versus a long period was for us?
I think we're deliberately vague on that
Yeah.
to give you some flexibility to decide on
A
that.
short period in Italy is like 400 years for a building to be
Sure.
around.
And at some point, we
here?
may get to that
Yeah.
point here in
Yeah.
California too. So I think that's to give you a sense of, if you're looking at multiple properties, what may be considered short or long. It could be something as short as a few months or the first, 5 or 6 years. Versus a property where an organization or a group was associated with it for 10 plus years. I think it really is to give you some of that flexibility.
Okay, great. Yeah, because considering that you were, in the thick of everything and seeing the organizations and how long they were for. Okay. Any other questions or comments? I had one more connected piece, just because you had Montecito and San Marcan as your examples. A client of mine had brought this up to me a while ago. I don't know if you have Hope Ranch's CC&Rs, but they're pretty bad too.
I've seen it.
So, if in case you hadn't, I'd printed out some
that's
so you can
great.
get included.
Thank you. Yeah, we were hoping to find one specific to within Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
And that is actually one of the projects I think the county is working on to try to identify some of that language, but without finding that specific property and getting the deed, and that's
Yeah.
not the easiest thing through the county records. So we were able to rely on some of the advertising that we found that was available. So it's not in the city of Santa Barbara. Hope Ranch was one of the places that we recognized that there was some of that language, and we expect that is around within the city as well.
Yeah, and it seems like it's also one of the strongly connected regions with Santa Barbara and then developed in the 1920s, so it kind of made sense, the connection.
Yeah, and I did want to address your question earlier too about whether this is Santa Barbara city or region, and most of it because all of your jurisdiction is within the city. We want to recognize that for the African American Black community, that certainly extended beyond city boundaries, and there's a more regional community that was here and still is here, and so some of this probably would translate, and hopefully some of your surrounding communities will think about doing similar context for their cities as well.
I just wanted to expand on what the county's doing. We did meet with the county records assessor, and they are embarking on a huge, many year project to go through all the old deeds, and they're going to expunge any racial covenants that are in them. There'll still be the documents in there, and there'll be a new document on top that says this language is expunged, and they're finding thousands. So anyway, it's a really great effort that the county is going through as well. And I think soon all of California is going to be required to do it by law, but our county assessor's way ahead.
Is that database digitized? Are they going through paper, or are they able to search?
I think they're doing both. Do you remember?
I think they were trying to scan the documents to make them searchable, and so that's one of the first steps. And right now, things are not searchable. They're just it's paper or it's microfiche, and so it's got to go through that first level of having it be digital in a way that's searchable by computer, OCR, that's right. And then they can try to find that language in an easier sense. And we're hoping from that, you'll start to see some of the patterns of which parts of Santa Barbara, which parts of the county had this language, whether it was particular subdivisions, particular areas, or is more property by property.
All right.
Actually, your document is searchable.
It should, I hope so.
Yeah.
It should be.
I mean, I went into it and was
Oh,
searching,
good.
yeah. Names, basically.
All right, any other comments? So on behalf of HLC and all this great effort that everyone's done, we want to thank everyone, including Healing Justice and your Paige and Turnbull, Ms. Hernandez, and all those, Commissioner Uli, all those who have really poured a lot of time into this as well. So thank you very much for all your hard work. And I have one potential suggestion I want to throw out for your historic trolley tour name, a name for it. So it could be the George Washington Carver and George Washington Smith Trolley Tour.
Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for it, and we look forward to the final presentation.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Do we need to take a little break before we go to item 2? All right. Let's take a, let's say 10-minute break. Recess. Order, Historic Landmarks Commission, July 6, 2022. We are on to now item 2, draft of El Pueblo Viejo sign bracket standards. This is a discussion item, and staff will present the draft El Pueblo Viejo sign bracket standards for feedback from the commission. So, welcome. If you could state your names for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Heidi Rydell. I'm the sign committee liaison.
I'm Ken Sogman, Chair for the Sign Committee.
All right, great.
So we have been working on putting together some objective standards for sign brackets in El Pueblo Viejo. We were seeing a lot of inconsistent brackets and unacceptable brackets, and so we just wanted to create a document that applicants could be posted on our website or sent to applicants so they have a clear idea of what is expected for brackets in the EPV, and so this is what we've come up with. So as you can see, we've got an introduction. These standards are created to establish consistent directions for the fabrication and installation of sign brackets throughout El Pueblo Viejo. Photographic references are included in the attachments to guide applicants. So we have some guidance for scrolls and cross-piece design. A solid stock is required. Scrolls with round or square stock shall be at least 3/8 of an inch thick, and ribbon scroll should be at least 1/4 inch thick and 1 inch wide. Tube steel is not allowed in the EPV. The ends of the cross piece shall have a finial or decorative element. We've been seeing issues with support chains. Chains shall be at least 3/16 of an inch thick and should be painted matte black. backplates. Backplate shall be sized in proportion to the crosspiece and shall be of a sufficient weight to support the projection of the crosspiece. The minimum backplate thickness is 1/4 inch for smaller signs. The minimum backplate width shall be 2.5 inches. Backplates shall have decorative elements and not be simply rectangular. Off-the-shelf backplates that do not meet the city's minimum design standards are potentially approvable if modified by changing the scroll or backplate designs to have acceptable dimensions, decorative features, and architectural details consistent with EPB guidelines. Color of bracket materials, all wrought iron and bracket support material shall be painted matte black. And then for exceptions to these standards may be requested. Refer to section 22.70.070 of the Santa Barbara Municipal Code. So then we go on through photographic examples. These are bracket backplate details. One of the things that was requested at the committee was we don't want just square plain backplates. We want some cutout detail, and I'm sure the Chair can elaborate on what kind of backplate details we're looking for. There's decorative scroll details and examples of weak chains. Not only are these chains unacceptable aesthetically, they are not secure and safe. The committee has been requiring a chain of at least 3/16 inch thickness and painted matte black. And then poor examples of brackets. Off-the-shelf scroll is less than 1/8 inch with no backplate detail. Brackets with less than 1/8 inch thick scrolls. And then these are some good examples of brackets with some captions below explaining how they are successful. And some examples of ways to modify off-the-shelf brackets to make potentially a more affordable option for an applicant. So that's it from me. If you have anything to elaborate.
Hopefully this has kind of outlined what we've been working at. Yes, there's been a lot of inconsistency of brackets in EPV, and some that have gone up that with or without permits. And as you can see on this last one here, that photograph on the left, there's quite a few of those that have been going up. Those are off-the-shelf brackets. And so we were trying to demonstrate an option that an applicant could use this bracket by changing out the scroll and beefing up the backplate. And hopefully some of the other photographs would help an applicant to know kind of what we're looking at before they submit their application. And any questions?
All right. Well, we'll go do public comment, and then we'll come back for
Oh, okay.
questions and comment. So if that's all, if you're good with your presentation, all right. So let's go to public comment. Any member of the public in the room wishing to comment on this item? All right. Seeing no one, we'll go to virtual public comment.
Yes, thank you, Chair Grumbine and Commissioners. So I can see a few members of the public joining by Zoom. So if you would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand to indicate that you would like to speak, and I will call on you. All right, so I don't see any hands raised for this item, and we haven't received any written correspondence. So I'll turn it over back to you, Chair Grumbine.
All right, thank you. So to the commission, and sorry for a little background context, were any of the were the commissioners or any part of this?
Committee member Jury is a member of the sign committee and has been part of these drafts. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to be here today.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks. All right, Commissioner Uli.
About the color, was Malaga green considered as, along with matte black, as a choice of color?
That could be.
Since that seems to be our standard color.
All right.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Vice Chair.
So, first of all, I applaud this effort. As you know, I was on the sign committee for decades, so it seems like, and this has, been an ongoing issue forever. And so how do you see this draft so far, and how far you be taking it? I mean, is this just a first really rough draft, or is this?
I think we're hoping with your comments to finalize this and just have it posted to the website similar to the EPV color guide. It's already on our website in its draft form, and I have already been referring applicants to it with a lot of success.
Okay. Well, that's a good question. So applicants are responding well to what you've posted so far? Okay.
Yes, they're very eager to have just objective standards, so they're not trying to play kind of a guessing game, and especially for signs, they want a quick, easy approval.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Commissioner Butler?
So I have two questions. First of all, sort of what's the demand level? Is there a lot of demand that needs, in terms of volume, to have these either updated or replaced? And then secondly, are there vendors locally that can manufacture? So if I want a new sign, and I just have a small shop, and I don't know anything about it, and I go to your guidelines, say, great, terrific, how do I get one of these? Do we have local manufacturers or local vendors that will abide by our guidelines? It could be a referenceable source for the store or for the retailer?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, in terms of volume of how often we're seeing this, I would say we do see a substantial amount of turnover in the shops in EPV, and most of them use blade signs that require brackets like this. So it is a good resource to have, and then I'll refer to you for local vendors who might be able to fabricate these. I think you would know.
Oh, I think there's local vendors that can fabricate these. I mean, when I was making signs, I used a couple of different vendors, and I know of a few others that certainly could do this work.
Yeah, I think if the retailer, whoever said, yeah, I know I can go to AAA sign manufacturers on Milpa Street or whatever, because they manufacture to current guidelines, something like that.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Vice Chair
If
House.
I could just clarify for you that it's generally been the policy of the city not to recommend manufacturers because they get themselves in hot water that way. So it's a challenge. It'd be nice to be able to do that.
Right, and Mr. Chair, through you, that's correct, and so we don't recommend contractors. I mean, we get a lot of those questions, particularly at the counter, of architects, contractors, sign vendors, but we use, that we can say, like, you want to look for a sign manufacturer. That's kind of the language that you might use to say, this is what you're going to do if you want to modify from that, or you want to buy something off the shelf, but it needs to be bolstered in order to meet the objective criteria that you would look for a sign manufacturer. And that tends to be a little bit more helpful.
And if I could add to that, most of our applicants go through a sign contractor. It's not usually the business owner themselves applying. So hopefully the local sign contractors know of a local vendor who can reproduce a bracket. And when I've been asked who can I go to create a bracket like this, I've just had to say, because we can't recommend people specifically, just to Google a metal worker or something like that.
Is, to sort of tie to that, is there a process that, like there's a list for approved historians, is there a list of local, not that you're saying that this is like, therefore they do it, therefore it will be right, but at least a list of potential to-go-tos that could be people allowed to sign up to it, or is that asking for trouble?
We do have a list of local sign contractors that we distribute to applicants who don't have a sign contractor and are looking for one. It's just a kind of comprehensive list, and I refer them to Google as well. We could discuss adding metal workers or vendors who could do these brackets to that list as
if you have a list of sign contractors, probably
Mr.
the
Chair?
easiest way. Yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lenvik.
There are numerous iron workers out there. I've gone to them myself, had lamps made, brackets made. They're probably in the city of Santa Barbara 4 to a half a dozen at least. They're not difficult to find. They're in the littlest, dumpiest places off the beaten path, but they're not difficult to find at all. And I think the important thing is that you have a drawing first, which indicates what the configuration of the bracket and the sign are going to be, and you review and approve it. So it's not like you could send someone to a sign fabricator and say, fabricate a bracket for me. You got to have a design first and have it approved. I think one of the things that I would say is that, and I think your presentation is very good. You know, I think simply stating that scale and proportion are an important part of any sign. And I see some sign brackets here that are very skinny and flimsy looking that would benefit by being beefed up a little bit. And so maybe someplace on your handout is simply a statement that scale and proportion are important and should reflect you know, the size of the sign, the weight of the sign, so on and so forth. My second comment is I think the twisted bar horizontal support element is really inappropriate in the architecture we use here for signage. I've never seen it used as part of a sign before. That's my opinion. I don't know what anybody else's is, but I think the twisted bar, number one, it's very bulky and out of scale, but it just, to me, it takes away from the delicacy of a bracket. Finally, I would suggest that you also offer them the opportunity to, on the larger plates, face plates that they're mounted to the wall, that you offer the opportunity that they be peened. One of the photographs there has a peened bracket, and more of them could have that and look very nice. There, one of those right there is peened on the left.
Yeah, that one's hammered.
Yeah, yeah. So I would say that peening that a larger surface adds a character and gives a guy a good excuse to vent his frustrations.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner. Vice Chair Haas.
Well, in my experience on the sign committee, it kind of came down to having a custom bracket manufactured could be at least 10 times the cost of finding something online, maybe 50 times. I mean, it can be really expensive. And so then there's a strong motivation for somebody to use an off-the-shelf bracket.
I'm sorry, I did a little bit of research with that, and then some of these off-the-shelf brackets are probably under $100.
Right.
And I would say a custom bracket, you'd be in the $400 to $500 range.
Yeah.
So just to give it some.
Yeah, a lot more than the shop owner
Yeah,
expected to spend, so is the problem. So they're looking for.
But then again, the sign itself could be
Exactly.
$1,000 easily.
Exactly, yeah. So, you know, in reading this over, my feeling was there was a lot of verbiage, and I just kind of wondered how clear it made it to an applicant who doesn't really speak the language, what they need to do. And then it seemed a little bit too, I mean, like saying scroll work needed to be a minimum 1/4 inch thick and 1 inch wide or something. That's not always the case. Sometimes lighter is appropriate. So that's the reason I was asking where this stands in its process. And I suppose it could be an evolving document, yes, and you could keep improving it. Because, you know, having been on the sign commission, I have lots of pictures of brackets, and I think we could come up with some better pictures. And there are other city documents, neighborhood preservation ordinance, or, you know, one of those hillside design guidelines that they use plus marks and minus marks next to illustrations, more of a graphic approach than all this text. So anyway, I would offer to help if you want to evolve the document more, so.
I was hoping you'd say that.
Most of the applicants are sign contractors, though.
What's that?
Most of the applicants are sign contractors, so they should be able to read through this and get an understanding of.
My experience on the sign committee, they wanted to get an approval, and God, why do these guys keep telling us what to do and making it complicated?
Yeah.
So,
Okay, well, thank you for the volunteer effort, if that sounds
leave
good.
it at that.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. Because it kind of has some of the similar thoughts and sizing, and maybe some diagrams will be easier to also illustrate.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so any other discussion on that? Does that sound like a plan moving forward? What's the overall, I would say, point out one thing, if you can go to the bracket backplate details, and right there, the middle one top. I know you're using it as a shaped thing, but I think it might be thin, like super thin, so maybe not, maybe not. You're trying to show one thing, but I think with Vice Chair House's additional photos, and you can probably swap some out. Okay, great. Well, thank you for your effort on this. I think this is going to help streamline people to be able to get a good sign and not recreate the swirly wheel every time. So.
It took up a lot of time at each meeting trying to explain to somebody what was faulty about their bracket.
Yeah, and there's probably a lot of similar pitfalls, so if we can have a little help guide, that might be very helpful for applicants. All right.
Mr. Chair, what kind of an action does the HLC need to take?
None, it's a discussion item.
So is that, I think there's a game plan for going forward too with Vice Chair House, so. Okay.
We'll take these comments back to the committee and loop in Vice Chair House.
Let me know.
All right.
Absolutely.
Sounds good. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so we are on to item number 3. This is 328 West Montecito Street. This is a continued item for concept review. This project is located within the EPV Landmark District, Part 1, and is adjacent to the Sayan Library at 316 Castillo Street, which is on the city's historic resources inventory. Proposal for a new 9-room hotel on a vacant lot consisting of a 2,600 square foot building with 4 hotel rooms, a 3,900 square foot building with 5 hotel rooms, 9 parking spaces in a 3,500 square foot parking garage, and 472 square feet of storage and mechanical room space. The project includes a site wall around the development, a trash room, bicycle storage, roof-mounted solar panels, outdoor seating areas, landscaping, and slight relocation of the existing access on West Montecito Street. The project is proposed as an annex to the approved hotel at 302 and 308 West Montecito Street. No appealable action will be take place at this meeting. Project compatibility findings will be required for project design approval. The project was last reviewed on April 27th, 2022. So, welcome. If you want to introduce yourself for the record.
Can you read the minutes?
And then we'll go into the minutes. If you can.
Thank you, Commissioner, board members. My name is Noah Greer. I'm here for On Design Architects.
Okay, great. And do we have any staff comments before we read the minutes?
No.
Okay, great. All right, so if we can go to the minutes. All right, so the motion was to continue indefinitely to the full commission with the following comments. The project has vastly improved. Applicant has responded to the commission's comments, and the design has been developed appropriately. All right. 2, one element that needs to be resolved further is the staircase. The commission would like to see it in 3-dimensional renderings. 3, the solar and mechanical equipment shall be screened, show at least 3 street views of the project. All right. 4, several commissioners are concerned with the location of the garage. The commission recognizes the garage has been moved back, but it may need to be moved back beyond the plane of the adjacent building. The commission will want to see a 3-dimensional model to understand it further. There is still concern that the wall plane of the entry of the garage is still too close to the sidewalk. 5, the oriel window and turret elements seem to stick out. The tower is nice, but at least one commissioner is open to not providing a tower. 6, on the west elevation, at least some commissioners find the 3 wall planes not necessary, perhaps combine 2 of them. Provide the 3-dimensional study to understand it further. Some commissioners may find it acceptable, but would like to see additional views. Look at the effect of the 6-foot curved wall in the corner and see how it blocks views of the street and how it relates to the street frontage and planters, knowing that all details will come before commission in the future. Since it is 2 buildings, articulate the parapets differently at the corner detail. 7, work with the neighbor to the north to discuss the appropriate height of the wall or height for the wall. An 8-foot wall may potentially be a better solution. Vote was by Uli, second by Drury, 7-0-0. Manuel was absent. The motion carried. All right. So with that,
Thank you, Chair and board members. Primarily, I'm here to walk through the 3D model with a number of views that speak to each of your comments. I'll try to keep my responses fairly quickly, but please understand, looking at this model, it really is a rough massing model. It has none of the finer architectural detail, ironwork. I don't even have mission tile roof shown at this point. It's really just to address, especially those higher level issues, most notably looking at the garage entry off West Montecito Street. So we'll start here. We're at the corner of Castillo Street and West Montecito Street, looking approximately north. And so the project, as you may recall, is one building towards the front and off to the right, fronting on West Montecito Street. Off to the right, you're seeing the garage entry in question that we'll look at. Then off to the left, down Castillo, you're seeing that stair that's in question. You'll note things like at the stair, I'm not showing any sort of ironwork yet. It's all a very basic model. Okay, here now on West Montecito Street, looking towards the northwest and looking at the entry in question. So I would make the argument that the combined mass of the tower with the balcony help provide some interesting massing there, so it doesn't just feel like a cold vehicular entry pushed right up against the sidewalk. I hope your board will agree, but that's what we're here to talk about. Then off to the right, you'll see 3 arched openings into the parking area. Those, in fact, throughout on this elevation, you'd see some custom ironwork that's not shown. All right, and now we've walked down to Castillo Street, looking towards the northeast. We're seeing that 6-foot site wall that wraps the corner to create an interior courtyard and provide some shadowing from the noise, let's say, at the corner. Then you're also seeing there on the left, that's the staircase in question. Okay, and then I should say, this is the current stair concept that you saw before. We haven't made changes to it at this point, and I'll welcome your board's comments on the sort of general intent. Okay, now looking still on Castillo, but looking back in the other direction. Here on the left at our property line, this is where we're now proposing an 8-foot stuccoed wall between us and the Santa Barbara Genealogical Society. And I have been working with Mr. Sylvester from the SBGS on what would be the best solution for them. And thankfully, the best solution for them is probably the best solution for us, which is to build that wall. Okay, those are the images I have to present, and I'll just very quickly fly through some of your specific comments. Comment number 2, questions about the staircase. I already spoke to that. I'll be happy to answer more questions later. Comment number 3, solar and mechanical equipment shall be screened. So speaking to that, you'll see that we have typically 30-inch parapets around the project. And then here on the left along Castillo, and we'll see it more here, we took your board's direction on playing with those parapets a bit and lifting them here at the corners of the northerly building to distinguish it a bit more.
Can you point to that with your...
I can, yes. Here, and so you'll see at the primary 4 corners of this building, we've done that move with the parapets. The intention being to keep it from being overly ornamented and trying to keep it simple. So I'm happy to hear your board's comments on that approach. Comment number 4 was again back at the garage and the entry. And the intention we had was to sink back the actual gate into the garage and bring forward the pedestrian gate, bring forward the tower, and then by nesting the balcony you say on top to try to bring some more life to the facade so it isn't simply a dead garage entry. And I hope you might agree. There's also questions about the oriel and the turret that we see, probably in stark contrast here for the building along West Montecito Street on the right. And I might agree, looking at a model, that I think the proportions certainly could use a bit of work. I personally, given the corner location, I like a bit of a playful element on that corner of the building. All right, and then moving towards the end of your list here, there was a request to see the effect of the 6-foot wall. And so we've included that in each of these renders here as we turn the corner from West Montecito Street, starting to look down Castillo, and then back the other direction. And we have worked to accommodate a planter as well along its length to help soften the impact of the mass of the building and the wall. All right, then there's a specific question from your board about the massing of the building that we're seeing here on the right, and a question about whether having the sort of separate gables there made sense. And we have another render here, this one I'd say, where you can really see the relief that we worked into that elevation. And I hope that your board will agree that that's an appropriate treatment for that building to help break it up from being just one big single gable mass. All right, and then the last comment I had from your board was about working with the neighbor to the north, which we have, and I believe we've agreed upon a great solution for us both with the shared wall. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, so let's, if that completes your presentation, we'll go to public comment. Any member of the public in the room that would like to comment, come on up to the podium. If you haven't filled out a speaker slip, please do after you're done commenting. Please introduce yourself for the record, and then you'll have.
Sylvester, President
Oh.
of Santa Barbara County Genealogical. I'll
Oh,
start again.
and then you'll have 2 minutes
Yeah.
to
I'm Arthur Sylvester, President of Santa Barbara County Genealogical Society, the neighbor to this project. I represent the society's 500 members and the interests of the property next door to the subject property. I have talked with architect Greer about the 8-foot wall. He indicated that he's copacetic with it. The only other comment that he and I mentioned but have not come to any kind of agreement on yet is that along the wall between us and their project, they want to plant a king palm and date palms, which are 40 feet high. They have long, heavy fronds that routinely blow off in the wind. And we recommend instead sweet shade, which is already on their planting list. It's also 40 feet high, but would give a visual break and there'd be no fronds. And if that's still in the purview of this committee or not, I can still talk with Architect Greer about that. That's all my comments. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, well, seeing no one else in the room from the for the public comment, we can go to virtual comment now.
Yes, thank you, Chair Grumbine and Commissioners. So if any member of the public joining by Zoom would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand to indicate that you would like to speak, and I will call on you. All right, so I don't see any hands raised for this item, and we have not received any written correspondence, so I'll turn it over back to you.
All right, thank you. All right, to the commission for questions. Any questions?
Sure.
Yes, Commissioner Manuel and then Vice Chair House.
Do you have a just response to the public comment about the planting in the back?
I do, yes, thank you. We aren't looking at the landscape plans at this point. We're happy to make those changes, and we've already directed our landscape architect to do so. We're just working through some other civil items now.
And then one more question. Can you go to the view that just looks at how the 6-foot wall interacts with the staircase, just to zoom in? I just want to see it better.
And in combo with that, your elevations combo question, and then maybe it'll help as well looking at this. Your elevations, are they the same as they were last time, or have you done changes? The ones that you submitted, the colored elevations.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, there are no changes to those elevations, as I recall. But and there were no changes made to the previous design for this. Excuse me while I struggle with my Zoom here.
You're not the only one that has that problem.
Good. I'm very happy to hear that.
Yeah.
So how the two meet here is admittedly unresolved still, yes. And understanding, and the reason I'm coming back to your board with this is simply because I think we have some sort of very substantial massing questions I just want to navigate before we get into the finer details of the model.
And I don't know how easy it is to jump back and forth, but if you can jump to your elevation of what you're proposed so that you see that it's not this, that would be helpful as well, just so that we're, because I think part of it is your model not being fully.
You can hit the Z key, and then you can do a marquee around something you want to blow up.
Oh, thank you. Let's do that.
I've had way too much caffeine.
Oh, they have. They get the coffee, we don't.
Yeah.
And excuse me, I have a street elevation in this set. This is an older plan set, it seems. It doesn't include the street elevation.
Oh, the bottom right, one, that's the
Ye-
view of the stair that I was talking about.
Yes, Mr. Chair, and we did have another street elevation that actually showed the sidewall as well, but
Okay, gotcha. So just in terms of what, compared to what the model is, looked like, okay. All right, other questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Vice Chair.
Could we go to the, well, actually, in that same plan set, the garage elevation? Okay. I couldn't remember exactly how that was articulated before, but so that is the same as, I mean, is your current 3D model any different than what you're portraying here?
in terms of overall massing, no. It's just lacking all the detail.
Okay.
And tied to that garage question, could you show in plan, because I wasn't quite sure from the rendering where if the rendering was showing what is in plan for where that garage door is, or gate is, or opening, how that works, yeah. Okay, so there's no opening, there's no wrought iron over that 14-foot opening. There's no wrought iron in that plane. Is that right?
Mr. Chair, that is correct. There would be, the wrought iron gate would slide back behind the mechanical equipment and close here approximately.
Okay, and then, so tied to that is, what's the reason for that? Or reasons for the wrought iron gate being set back there?
Multiple reasons, Mr. Chair. Firstly, providing for safe ingress and egress, particularly when pulling into the site. Should the gate be closed, should there be delayed opening for some reason, it gets people out of the flow of traffic. And secondly, just an intention to push back the actual enclosure as much as we could.
Okay, and is there any mechanical reasoning, like do you need access to the mechanical equipment when the gate is closed that prevents you from putting it in front of it?
Mr. Chair, I don't believe so.
All right. Other questions?
Yeah.
Commissioner Lendick?
So what I understand is that when I look at the Castillo Street elevation, building elevation, the wall that is, I call it a garden wall, is that rendered as, is that drawn as 6 foot high?
Excuse me, Commissioner, do you mind if we look at it in this
As
view?
it comes to the genealogy property.
Correct, and I think we have a better view here. So this is shown coming down as a 6-foot wall that then steps up, I can't remember, maybe perhaps between 4 and 8 feet back.
I think an 8 foot high property line wall is an awful thing to build. And if you're being driven by compromise with the Genealogy Society, I think it's a horrible place to go. I can't imagine putting an 8 foot high property line wall there and having it be a friendly thing.
Question mark.
Well, that door is 7 foot high, I believe.
No, I know. I'm just
Maybe that's 8 foot high. Yeah, that door is 8 foot high, probably, and that's or 7.6. That's very, very, very high to run along that property line.
And just to understand that a little better, can we go to plan for a minute here? And just, if we can go, talk us through where it transitions from 6 to 8 feet.
That whole north wall is 8 foot, I understand.
Right, so, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, that transition would happen in this zone. We have the 6-foot wall, then it would transition to 8 shortly, or right behind it.
So is that shown in the 3D model? I'm not seeing.
It was actually built in the model, but it's not visible behind the foliage right here. So it's just hidden right back here.
That's the market building we're seeing in the background.
That is correct.
Santa Cruz Market.
Okay, so yeah, is there any other view that does show it more clearly, or no?
I don't believe so.
The only place it's really be visible, I assume, is from the Genealogy Society's yard.
Well, that transition you're going to still see from the road. If in plan that's where it transitions, I'm just not seeing it in the model.
My question is, how adamant did you find the Genealogy Society about an 8-foot-high wall, and what is their rationale for wanting that high a wall? I mean, to me, that's horrible.
Okay, so as a question, was there any discussion of less than an 8-foot wall?
There was, and I won't speak for Mr. Sylvester, but I will say that in our discussion, there's definitely a concern about the traveling of homeless across the site, given its adjacency to the railroad tracks and a number of encampments. And at least part of the thinking there is that an 8-foot wall is sufficiently difficult to scale that it would be a disincentive to that.
All right. Does that answer your question?
Well, that's their rationale. It doesn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Other questions? Questions? Okay.
I have comments when you're ready.
Yeah. Okay, just making sure there's no other questions. All right, so let's roll into comments. Why don't you kick us off, Commissioner Lindberg?
Well, I find that the Montecito Street frontage with the garage opening right at the, almost at the back of the sidewalk is unacceptable. We have been really working on this on projects the last 2 or 3 years to get these garage openings set back behind the leading face edge of the building. And they've not done it here. I mean, they've continued with the original design and have that big mouth right there on the face of the building, and it's not acceptable to me.
Okay. And as everyone makes their comments, can you also make sure to comment on the key things that we commented on last time, as well as anything else now that we're seeing it in 3D as well. So anything else that jumps out to you, but the stair we know is still TBD, is still going to be developed per our comments before. The screening of the solar and the parapet, and whether you're finding that acceptable, and the parapet design in general as well. The garage, the tower, and the oriel window detail. The 6-foot tall wall that curves. The broken gable composition, where there's 2 gables and that with a space in between, how you see that in 3 dimensions now, and the 8-foot tall wall. So,
Mr. Chair,
yes,
could we
Vice
clarify
Chair.
terminology? I would call that the oriel window, and that is a turret? Or are you referring to that as the oriel? I think that's an oriel window to
I'm
me.
trying to remember who made the comment.
I know there was concern about this turret element last time. I don't recall there was big concern about the oriel.
Yeah, but we have it in our minutes, so apparently there was. I'm trying to think, but that oriel actually might be the little guy. We'll change our terminology. Yeah. We'll say the little turret. We'll call it turret. Little turret element on the corner, and then we'll say the other. It was more. That's more like a mirador, wasn't it?
Similar, yeah.
Yeah. So and we'll call.
Well, they're from
mirador
different languages, so
yeah.
It could be the
All
same
right.
thing.
I want to one more comment about this.
Commissioner Lindvik.
Montecito Street frontage. We really expect street frontages to be pedestrian friendly, and I find this elevation of the building to be the most unfriendly elevation I can imagine, other than the Bank of America on State Street. I don't see this as a pedestrian-friendly frontage at all, and I cannot support this.
Okay.
What is the ceiling height on the first and second floor?
Commissioner, I believe you went with 9-foot plate heights.
Vice Chair House, did you want to?
Well,
these things?
first of all, on the subject of the property line wall, I think it was my suggestion to make it an 8-foot wall. I don't have a problem with that in the context of the outdoor location. So, yeah, I don't have a problem with it, and I think that if it's something that the neighbor is supportive of too and helps resolve a potential problem, I definitely would support it. I would agree with Commissioner Lenvik on the Montecito Street elevation is just not friendly, and if we go back to the view of that, it just needs some more study, and I think that the plane of the opening needs to step back, because when it's all combined with the tower, it's just an awkward element and kind of non-designed. It's just, I mean, if those little swoop ups weren't there, then it would be obvious what's wrong with it, and those are like dressing to kind of, a Band-Aid on it. But I think that facade of the garage opening needs to move back. Now, I know that's an issue for you with the mechanical and everything else. Also, it's potentially awkward since we're not seeing the view looking the other way. On the left side of the opening, you've got a solid wall going all the way back to the gate, but on the right side, it's pushed back just beyond the opening and with the door into the mechanical space. So it just does not feel like something that would be pleasant to view as a pedestrian walking down the sidewalk. So that garage just still needs a lot of study. And I would be a little concerned that once you push that back, then the tower maybe seems a little skinny, and I don't know, is that elevator in there? Or, okay, so the roof could come down a little bit, and that would address the proportions. At the right side of that image, the two-story element back behind the shed roof elements, is there any reason why that doesn't have the same step up at the corners that you have on the, yeah, that might help with that too, because it just kind of looks like everything in front of that is dressing it up, and it's just, kind of an artifact, not worked on. Other than that, I'm fine with it, and yes, definitely the stair still needs to be addressed, but I like the overall massing of the building. I don't have a problem with the two gables, because I think that, I understood it from the last drawings, but now that we see this three-dimensional view, I can see the way they're offset. That notch between them doesn't seem as foreboding as it seemed in the elevations. So.
All right. Who wants to go next?
Mr. Commissioner.
Yeah, Commissioner Butler.
I agree with Commissioner House's last comment there, because I think I had raised that part of the last review too, as the two gables, et cetera. So that's, I guess, in looking at this and looking on the Montecito entry as well, it's like, where's the front of this building? How do I get into this place? This doesn't have an entry to it. And I recognize it's an annex to further down the street, correct? But if I were walking back to here, to my hotel room from Santa Cruz Market next door or whatever, where's the front of this place? How do I get in? Is it I probably would try to go through the parking, the gate for the parking, or is it the archway next to that, or if I go around the corner? So I'm struggling with that, with the utility of it. Where's the front of this place? So that's the big comment. We'll ignore the stairs, because I know we're working on that. The turrets are fine. We still have a few more things to go. But I'll leave it at that. I think that was my biggest concern, was I just can't figure out how to get into the building.
All right. Are there comments? Anyone else want to add comments?
I didn't review it last time, so I'm gonna.
Okay. Frank, comments. All right. I'll start to make landscape comments, and then you blink at me if I make them wrong. All right. Okay. So other ones I'll just add to are the oriole or turret, or the little cylindrical corner element. I know that this isn't rendered fully yet, but I think right now it's at least out of scale with the building. The building's a pretty simple building, and to have a little detail like that there isn't little details elsewhere very much. So it seems like it's a little bit out of place. So I think at least study the scale of it more, from my opinion. But not maybe others don't agree with it. So. So I'll summarize the comments, and then I think the plant-wise, so the one landscape architect can't comment, but we'll talk about it next time. I think in terms of the what the substitution of the sweet shade. Okay, so the stair. So to sort of summarize, the stair we know is still in development, and we're looking forward to seeing how it develops. The screening of the solar and mechanical appears to, from the renderings provided, it looks good, looks appropriate. The garage is and the Montecito Street frontage, the Montecito facade, is problematic. As currently designed, it's unacceptable, especially the garage opening. Recommendation to push back the opening to at least the plane of the wall on the right-hand side, and perhaps more, but to look at pushing back that opening, and trying to make it less strong of an element. We'll just kind of leave it at that. There were some other comments about potential ways of addressing it, but I think the main thing is it's not working. It's not working right now. And then I would also say the wrought iron gate alignment needs to have its own detail and logic if it's going to be a gate that's closed, because right now it has opened to one side and it just goes against the wall and it's not responding to the actual opening of plaster right now. So it needs to kind of have its own feel that it is a wrought iron gate that's closed and then it rolls away when you come, but it feels like an opening into itself. The tower or the cylindrical element on the corner, at least one commissioner felt that it needs to be additional study with potentially the scale of it or other options to look at for a corner detail. The 6-foot-high walls seem to be, curving walls seem to be acceptable. No one commented otherwise, and it seemed to work in 3 dimensions to me. So it's acceptable as submitted. The broken, or the pair of gables, no one seemed to have a negative comment of it. So it seems to be fine in 3 dimensions. The 8-foot wall to the neighbor's side was divided at least some commissioners do not find it not acceptable, or find it, not acceptable and too tall of a wall. I would say that coming back with an additional detail of how it transitions and how that corner goes from 6 foot to 8 foot would be important, and is potentially, some commissioners were not, found it potentially acceptable. So additional study is needed on that. And then also the comment of a clear entrance, or where is the front entry, needs to be answered as well. So I think we can just kind of leave it open as to how that's going to get solved, but from the street frontage so that someone knows what the entrance is. And I think that's it. Any other comments?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Lenvik.
Regarding this 8-foot wall and the concern of the Genealogy Society about vagrants coming across it. How are vagrants getting into the motel site to then attack the wall and go over?
Over the 6-foot wall.
Well, where do we stop? Yeah. Where do we stop? It seems like it's really an overkill, and I don't. I just can't believe it's necessary. And to throw a comment in regarding the turret on the corner, it is a superfluous piece of architecture that is not needed on this building. It works on the courthouse, but it doesn't work here. And I can't imagine why we'd ever need to have that element there as a functioning piece of architecture. I mean, are you hiding something in it? I mean, I don't know.
Archers to shoot from.
Yeah,
oil.
to me it's you know,
But we don't know
a
what
really
the entrance
poor a poor excuse to try to create something that has some dignity to it, and it doesn't. do
Okay,
it.
so we'll say for that it's there. Some commissioners feel that it's still it should be reworked or removed.
It doesn't function at the courthouse either. You can't get to it.
But I think it's a little more balanced with the multiple elements because there's not a single symmetrical thing in there. All right, so I think any other comments to add? Everyone good with those comments? Are those comments and direction clear? All right. All right. Thank you very much to the applicant, and yeah, best of luck on the next round of development. Thank you. We look forward to seeing it. Thank you. All right. Any other discussion before?
Excuse me, was it a motion to continue indefinitely or?
Sorry.
I'll
yeah.
make a motion to continue indefinitely.
I'll second that.
All right. Motion by Commissioner Uli, second by Vice Chair House. Under discussion. Any discussion? All right. Can we have a roll call vote?
Yes, I'll start with Commissioner Butler,
Yes?
Commissioner Lundvik,
Yes.
Commissioner Uli,
Yes.
Commissioner Manuel,
Abstain.
Commissioner Dorden,
Yes.
Vice Chair House,
Yes.
and Chair Grumbine.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes.
All right. All right. And now, anything else before we adjourn? All right. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.